So what are the implications of that study? Well, we feel that what that tells us is that although our students have a basic level of comfort with many ICTs, that there's really not a generation really doesn't explain anything. And what we think we found is that our students have a very instrumental view of technology, learning technology. They use it to achieve very specific purposes, and they're not using it simply because it's there. And so in our case at BCIT, they were driven by the ubiquity, the self-organizing capabilities of the technology, the type of communication it provides, and whether it was practical. There was actually seemed to be much more concern about some of the program-specific technologies, the kind of lab technologies, the infrastructure in the institute. Some of the students, we asked them about learning technologies. They started talking about, well, actually what we would really need is some windows in this classroom so that we can see. This is the interior design students who are saying, they just don't have enough natural light in order to see what they're doing. So they had very practical requests, and were less interested in some of the more advanced technologies. Interesting thing about group work is, as we saw in the results, they really don't like group work. So even though they consider themselves very social, they're not really interested in working in groups. Now that may be related to the way that BCIT programs are designed and structured. They're very, and the kind of the workload that students have, and they fear that they may waste time in a group situation and have their mark determined partly by the results of some of their colleagues who may not work as hard as them. So it's a fairly competitive environment, and that probably has something to do with it. So really, I think it's also related to the motivation for the group work. I think if they feel that working in a group is going to help them achieve their outcomes more effectively, they're more likely to support that. But they don't want to just do group work for the sake of doing group work. So the implications of this study really suggest that generation doesn't explain communication and technology preferences at BCIT. And notice that I'm saying at BCIT. I'm not trying to generalize to the entire generation. BCIT's NetGen students are not significantly different than non-NetGen students, at least in terms of those characteristics. And just to say a little bit more about the generational issue, it clearly, from the results of our study, doesn't explain technology use or learning preferences. And really what we think matters is the context, is the nature of the program, the way the program is designed, the kind of students that are in that particular program, because our programs vary considerably. We have trades programs, we have technical programs, we have health sciences, we have part-time learners, we have older learners, younger learners. So it's a real varied student group. And we think it's very important to make decisions based on those specific needs. And just before I finish with that review of that study, I just want to mention that I wasn't the only person involved. In fact, I'm not the key person involved. The two co-researchers are my colleagues, Adnan Qayyum, who's actually the lead on it, and Tanis Morgan. So just to conclude, what does this all mean? I think the conclusion is kind of basic, fundamental. It's really about instructional design. It's really about asking the right questions. It's not assuming that an entire generation fits a profile based on some questionable research. So we need to be, once again, asking ourselves, who are our learners, not the learners in some book that somebody's written, but the learners at our institution and our programs. How are they different than faculty and administrators, or are they? We can't assume that. And what learning activities, what technologies should be using that are most engaging for those learners? And are there ways to use IT to make learning more successful, but based on the needs of our learners? The other another point I think that comes out of this is the notion that we need to separate or distinguish between the social use of technology and the educational use. I think one of the mistakes we make is we assume that because our students may or may not be using technologies widely for social purposes, that they necessarily want to use those for educational purposes. And that's not always the case, and our research found that our students had a very clear sense of what technologies they wanted to use to communicate with their peers and which ones they wanted to use to communicate with their instructors. And they actually felt that when we asked them if they wanted to communicate with instant messaging, if they wanted their instructor to use instant messaging, they found that kind of awkward. They thought that was weird, that it would be instant messaging with their instructor. Educators need to be much more